Nobody inside the Renwick estate understood why Sebastian Renwick was in such a terrible mood. By 10 that morning, 3 bodyguards had already been reassigned to warehouse duty after making minor mistakes. One trusted captain had nearly lost his position for interrupting a meeting half a second too early. A negotiation involving a $6 million shipping contract had been postponed because Sebastian abruptly walked out before anyone finished speaking. The mansion had fallen into complete silence. Staff whispered only when absolutely necessary. Footsteps became softer. Doors closed more carefully. Even the chefs lowered their voices in the kitchen. Everyone assumed someone had betrayed the Renwick family. After all, Sebastian Renwick wasn't known for losing his temper without reason. He was known for something far worse: control. The man had once negotiated with rival syndicates while a gun was pointed at his chest without changing the tone of his voice. He had buried enemies without blinking. He had stared down federal investigations with the same calm expression he used while drinking his morning espresso. Fear simply wasn't an emotion people associated with Sebastian Renwick. Until today. Inside his office, another expensive fountain pen cracked between his fingers. Owen Faraday, Sebastian's longtime underboss, quietly glanced at the broken pieces before pretending not to notice. No one commented. No one breathed louder than necessary. Sebastian stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the estate grounds. But he wasn't seeing the gardens. He was seeing an empty breakfast chair. Every morning for nearly 3 years, someone had walked into his study, carrying black coffee, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and exactly 2 slices of orange, because his physician insisted he needed more vitamins. Every morning, she reminded him to eat. Every morning, he ignored her. Every morning, she ignored his refusal and quietly placed the plate where he couldn't avoid seeing it. Eventually, he always ate. Not because he was hungry, because she would smile whenever she returned later and found the plate empty. It had become such an ordinary routine that Sebastian had stopped questioning why the highlight of his mornings involved homemade bread baked by one of the estate's maids. Until this morning, she had been strangely quiet. No teasing reminder about his medication. No gentle argument over coffee. No fresh loaf cooling on the kitchen counter. And for reasons he refused to examine too closely, the entire estate suddenly felt colder. A soft knock interrupted the suffocating silence. 3 measured taps. Owen looked toward the door. "Sir, may I come in?" A timid voice answered from outside. Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. Barely noticeable, but Owen saw it. So it's her, he thought. "Come in." The heavy oak door opened slowly. Marisol Vance stepped inside, carrying a neatly organized stack of housekeeping reports against her chest. She wore the same simple uniform she had worn almost every day for 3 years. Her soft brown hair was tied into a loose bun, a few stubborn curls framing her round face. Her gentle smile appeared almost apologetic, as though she were worried about interrupting people, far more important than herself. She thanked every gardener by name, remembered every employee's birthday, brought soup to security guards without telling anyone. Half the estate quietly believed she was the kindest person living behind the mansion walls. The other half secretly wondered how someone so warm had survived 3 years working for Sebastian Renwick. She stopped a respectful distance from the desk. "I'm sorry for interrupting." Sebastian finally looked at her. "What is it?" "I finished organizing tomorrow's guest rooms." She set the reports on the edge of his desk. "I also wanted to let you know I'll be leaving a little early tonight, and I might be late coming in tomorrow morning." His jaw tightened. "Why?" She hesitated. a faint blush rising in her cheeks. "I have a date tonight." The silence that followed lasted only 2 seconds, but to Owen, standing quietly by the window, it felt like an hour. He watched something flicker across his boss's face, something he had genuinely never seen there before. Not anger, something closer to panic, quickly and violently suppressed. "A date," Sebastian repeated, his voice perfectly flat. "Yes, sir. A co-worker's cousin." Louise set it up. Marisol shifted her weight, uncomfortable under his sudden, intense attention. "Is that a problem?" "No." The word came out clipped. "That's not a problem." She gave a small, uncertain nod and excused herself, closing the door softly behind her. The moment the latch clicked, Sebastian stood, walked to the window, and stared out at nothing for a long, silent minute. "Sir," Owen said carefully. "Sir," Owen said carefully. "The Delacroix negotiation is rescheduled for 2. Do you want me to cancel it?" "Cancel the entire—" "I said cancel it, Owen." Owen had worked for Sebastian Renwick for 11 years. He had watched the man face down assassins, corrupt judges, and 3 separate assassination attempts without so much as raising his pulse. He had never once seen him rattled by anything as ordinary as a woman mentioning dinner plans. He said nothing further. He simply left the office and quietly began rearranging the entire afternoon's schedule. By early evening, Sebastian had done something he hadn't done in over a decade. He'd asked his head of security for a name. "Who is he?" Sebastian asked, standing at the window of his study, while the sun dropped low over the estate grounds. Gabriel Ricci, the young head of internal security, hesitated. "Sir, respectfully, is this a security matter?" "Everything on this property is a security matter." Gabriel exhaled slowly. "His name is Trevor Hale. Works in claims processing for an insurance firm downtown. No criminal record, no known associations. Louise set them up through a co-worker." Sebastian said nothing. "Sir," Gabriel said carefully, "with respect, Marisol isn't in danger. She's going to a restaurant, not a warehouse raid. I know what she's doing." Sebastian's voice was too controlled, the way it always got when something underneath it was straining against the surface. "That will be all, Gabriel." Gabriel left. Sebastian remained at the window long after the sun had gone down, watching the driveway, watching for a car he had no legitimate reason to be watching for. At 6:45, Marisol emerged from the staff quarters, wearing a soft green dress instead of her uniform, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pinned up. She looked, Sebastian thought, with a discomfort he refused to name, entirely unlike the maid who brought him bread every morning, and entirely like someone he suddenly could not stop looking at. A modest sedan pulled up to the service entrance. A young man in a decent but unremarkable jacket stepped out to open her door. Sebastian's hand curled into a fist against the windowsill. He did not follow them. He told himself, repeatedly, that following them would be an absurd overreaction for a grown man who ran one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the Eastern Seaboard. He told himself this while pacing his study for the next 3 hours. He told himself this while ignoring 4 business calls. He told himself this while Owen quietly closed the office door and left him alone, correctly guessing that nothing productive would happen that evening. At 9:52, Marisol's phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, where she'd left it charging before her date. It was on the estate's shared network, and the location ping, something every staff member's device carried for safety, a policy Sebastian had personally instituted years earlier, showed her car parked outside a restaurant downtown, stationary, for the last 2 hours. Sebastian stared at the small blue dot on the screen in Owen's hand for a full 10 seconds before speaking. "Is that all?" he asked. "Just the restaurant?" "Just the restaurant, sir." Owen kept his tone carefully neutral. "They're probably just having a nice dinner." Sebastian said nothing. He walked back into his study and shut the door. Marisol returned to the estate a little after 11, letting herself in through the staff entrance, exhausted and a little disappointed. The date had been fine. Trevor was polite, forgettable, entirely uninterested in learning anything real about her, spending most of dinner talking about his fantasy football league. She hadn't expected fireworks. She also hadn't expected the strange, hollow feeling in her chest that had nothing to do with Trevor at all. She found Sebastian in his study, still in his suit, a glass of untouched scotch in front of him. "You're still up," she said, surprised. "Working." She glanced at the desk. There were no files open, no laptop screen glowing. Just the same fountain pen from that morning, taped clumsily back together. "How was your evening?" Sebastian asked, not looking at her. "Fine." She hesitated. "It won't happen again. The date, I mean. It wasn't a good match." Something in Sebastian's shoulders loosened by a fraction so small she almost missed it. "That's not my concern," he said, too quickly. "Of course not." She turned to go, then paused at the door. "Good night, Mr. Renwick." He didn't answer until the door had nearly closed. "Good night, Marisol." Over the following weeks, something in the estate's rhythm shifted, subtle enough that most of the staff didn't notice, but Owen and Gabriel certainly did. Sebastian began appearing in the kitchen at odd hours, always with some flimsy business reason, always somehow present whenever Marisol was baking. He started remembering, with unnerving precision, which mornings she preferred tea over coffee. He began insisting, over her protests, that a car take her home on her days off, instead of the bus she'd used for 3 years without incident. "It's not about you," he told her flatly, when she questioned it. "It's a liability issue. Staff shouldn't be exposed unnecessarily." "I've taken that bus for 3 years, Sebastian." It was the first time she'd used his first name without the title attached. Neither of them mentioned it, but something passed between them anyway, quiet and unresolved. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning in early spring, when Marisol didn't appear with breakfast at all. Sebastian sat alone at his desk at 8, then 8:30, the coffee pot in the kitchen untouched, no bread in the oven, no sound of her humming down the hall the way she always did. By 9, he was standing in the doorway of the housekeeping office, where Louise Whitfield, Marisol's closest friend on staff, was folding linens. "Where is she?" Sebastian asked, with none of his usual composure. Louise looked up, startled by both his tone and his sudden appearance, in a room he'd never once entered in 3 years. "She called in sick, bad fever. I told her to stay home." "Alone?" "She lives alone, Mr. Renwick." Sebastian was in his car within 4 minutes. He arrived at Marisol's small apartment building 20 minutes later, having driven himself, without a single guard, for the first time in over a decade. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. The door opened a crack. Marisol stood there in an oversized sweatshirt, pale, shivering, clearly running a serious fever. "Sebastian," her voice was hoarse, confused. "What are you? You're coming with me." "I'm fine. I just need to rest." "You're burning up." He stepped inside without waiting for permission, taking in the cramped apartment, the empty medicine cabinet, the lack of anyone else there to help her. Something in his chest tightened painfully. "You've been taking care of an entire estate for 3 years, and there's nobody here to take care of you." "I don't need." "Marisol." His voice cracked, just slightly on her name. Please. She looked at him for a long moment, too exhausted to argue, and something in his expression, raw, unguarded, entirely unlike the man who negotiated with killers, made her nod. He drove her back to the estate himself. He installed her in one of the guest rooms, near his own wing, over her protests. He personally called his family's private physician rather than trusting the task to anyone else. When the doctor confirmed it was simply a bad flu requiring rest and fluids, Sebastian didn't leave the room. He sat in the armchair beside her bed for the rest of the day, reading through paperwork he wasn't actually processing, occasionally glancing up to make sure she was still breathing evenly. "You don't have to stay," Marisol murmured that evening, half asleep. "I know." "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer for a long moment. "Because the mornings you weren't in the kitchen felt wrong. And I don't like feeling things I can't control." She managed a weak, feverish laugh. "Is that your version of caring about someone?" "Apparently." She fell asleep before he could say anything else. He stayed until morning anyway. 3 days later, once Marisol had recovered enough to return to her regular duties, Owen found Sebastian standing in his office, staring at the same empty breakfast chair he'd been staring at for weeks. "Sir," Owen said carefully, "if I may. You're going to say it anyway. You're not angry about a bodyguard's mistake, or a shipping contract, or anything happening in this business." Owen chose his words with the caution of a man who had survived over a decade in this house, precisely because he knew when honesty was safe. "You've been like this since the day she mentioned a date. I think you know exactly why." Sebastian said nothing for a long time. "Get my car," he finally said. "I need to buy bread." The small bakery, 3 blocks from the estate, had never seen Sebastian Renwick walk through its door before. Marisol was there on her afternoon off, sitting alone at a corner table with a cup of tea, staring out the window, looking uncharacteristically lost in thought. The bell above the door chimed. She looked up, startled. Sebastian Renwick stood in the doorway. No bodyguards, no convoy, no expensive overcoat. Just one man carrying a plain brown paper bag. He walked toward her table. "May I sit?" She nodded. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Sebastian placed the paper bag on the table. Inside lay one slightly burnt loaf of bread. Marisol blinked. "You baked this?" "I tried." A tiny laugh escaped her despite everything. "It's terrible, I know," he said. "It collapsed. The crust is uneven, and I may have confused sugar with salt." She smiled wider. "I can tell." Sebastian looked directly into her eyes. "I finally understood something. When you weren't there, the mansion kept running. The business kept growing. The money kept coming." He paused, "but it stopped feeling like home." Marisol's smile slowly faded. He continued quietly. "I thought I was protecting an employee. I was lying to myself. I was protecting the woman I couldn't imagine losing." His voice remained calm, yet every word carried absolute honesty. "I wasn't angry because you had a date. I was terrified. Terrified that someone else might discover what I realized too late." He took a slow breath. "That, somewhere between your reminders to take my medication, your arguments over breakfast, and every loaf of bread you quietly left outside my office, I fell in love with you." The bakery fell completely silent. Even the barista stopped pretending not to listen. Marisol felt tears fill her eyes. "You should have told me." "I know. I was afraid." She laughed softly through her tears. "The most feared man in the city was afraid?" Sebastian smiled. "Only of one woman." She stood, walked around the table, then wrapped her arms around him. Not because he was powerful, not because he had rescued her, but because for the first time, he had allowed himself to be vulnerable. She rested her forehead against his. I don't need a bodyguard. I don't need a mansion. I don't need a mafia boss. I only need the man who secretly ate my bread every Sunday. Sebastian laughed, a genuine laugh, one his employees had almost never heard. Several months later, the Renwick estate looked exactly the same. The gardens bloomed. The staff hurried through familiar hallways. Fresh bread filled the kitchen with its comforting aroma. Only one thing had changed. During the annual charity gala, reporters gathered outside the mansion gates. One journalist asked the inevitable question. Mr. Renwick, there have been rumors. Who is the woman standing beside you? Sebastian looked toward Marisol. She was no longer wearing a maid's uniform. Instead, she stood confidently in an elegant midnight blue dress, still smiling, with the same warmth that had first transformed his lonely mornings. Sebastian gently took her hand. His answer was simple. This is Marisol Vance. He smiled proudly. The woman who taught me that fear isn't losing an empire. It's losing the person who makes coming home worth it. The cameras flashed. The estate staff applauded. Owen quietly whispered to Gabriel. I told him he was jealous. Gabriel smirked. You told him on day one. Marisol laughed. Sebastian kissed her forehead, and for the first time in many years, the most feared mansion in the city finally became a home. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected love, hidden danger, and the courage to open one's heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We'd love to hear in the comments. At what moment did you realize Sebastian wasn't protecting an employee anymore, but the woman he loved?